Hey guys, this is James Cave, teacher from Roseville Area High School, and I'm joined again today with Nick Pouladian. Nick is an attorney for the Legal Rights Center in Minneapolis. Welcome, Nick.
James, good to see you again.
So today is day 2 of the actual trial. Yesterday we saw the opening statements. Could you give us a gist of what both attorneys were saying in their opening statements?
Yeah, so the prosecution for the state, led by Mr. Blackwell, who I was actually surprised to learn he has never apparently done a criminal case. He's a primarily civil law practitioner, but I thought he did a great job. He laid out the case, basically just saying, folks, here's what you're going to see, here's what you're going to hear. And he had a theme going out the whole time, saying that essentially Derek Chauvin didn't let up, and he didn't get up. He didn't let up the damage he was doing to George Floyd, and he never got up off of him. So that was sort of his common theme the whole time going through. He talked about how the jury is going to hear from use of force experts. You're going to hear from the chief of police that this technique was not okay, that it was inappropriate, that medical experts are going to come in and testify that George Floyd died as a result, at least substantially, from the actions of Derek Chauvin. And they did talk about, too, they sort of hedged their weaknesses or what they perceived the defense is going to be bringing up, right? So they talked about George Floyd's past drug use. They talked about George Floyd's medical conditions to address that, to say, hey, they're going to raise this issue, and here's why it's not an issue, or here's why it's not a saving grace for them. So it was very powerful, and I think the most impactful thing he did was show the video. That viral video, and he showed all of it. And for jurors who either hadn't seen it or hadn't seen the whole thing, I think that definitely had to be an impactful moment for them to say, whoa, people have talked about this or asked about it, but here it is, right?
So that's the prosecution statement. What was the defense statement yesterday?
The defense essentially focused on reasonable doubt. Right, they said that, folks, there's going to be reasonable doubt here based on Derek Chauvin's training, based on the circumstances, and primarily based on cause, right? They're going to bring up saying, well, George Floyd had drugs in him, he had a heart condition. Those things combined were the ultimate cause of death, not what Derek Chauvin was doing. And we're going to ask you to use your common sense, and we're going to ask you to really view and work with that reasonable doubt standard, right? So it was, I say this knowing that there just isn't a lot for him to work with. It's not always advised to open up with focusing on reasonable doubt, right? Typically you want to tell a story, right? You want to present two competing stories to the jury to say, folks, here is the version of events that you're actually going to see. Here's what this actually means. In this case, it's just realistically not there. So he's going to what he has to work with, which is trying to needle that reasonable doubt standard based on the cause of death. So it was what it was.
And he doesn't have to convince 12 people. He has to convince one.
Exactly. He just needs one person to say, maybe it was the drugs and not the knee. I don't know, and if he gets that, then it's at least a mistrial, right? Definitely.
So I want to focus on a couple of the witnesses. I don't want to focus on every witness because there's like 450 of them listed, and they won't all take the stand. But let's talk about just a few. Yesterday, the prosecution, they called to the stand a man who was at the scene. You can hear him very clearly on the video, and he considers himself in mixed martial arts, correct?
Yep, exactly.
So what was going on there? Why was he brought to the witness stand? What was the prosecution trying to do?
Yeah, so, and I think it's Mr. Williams, I think is his last name. So Donald Williams. He is the gentleman you see on camera from Tutau's body camera and some other cell phone videos. You can see him and you can hear him really pointing out very vocally to Derek Chauvin, to the other officers, saying, what are you doing? You're killing him. Check his pulse. really pointing out to the officers, hey, this is wrong and you guys need to stop, right? The reason that the state brought him in, number one, to sort of establish the scene, establish the emotion of the scene outside of the video. The video is powerful, but if you can bring in a human being who was there to say, hey, here's what was happening. Yeah, you can hear my voice, and I'm going to tell you why I was so upset or why I was so desperate to get these people to listen to me. The martial arts background is helpful because he can get up there and testify, which he did, and talk about his training and his experience in the martial arts in, I think he said boxing, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, karate, a few other things, wrestling, to say, hey, I have some experience in this and I've worked security. I've been a bouncer, I've been private security. So I know what types of holds or what types of body movements are appropriate to use on people. And I know what they can do. I know what kind of damage they can do. And that's why I was so animated here, because I saw Derek Chauvin putting on what's he called a blood choke. He talked about that being a maneuver to the side of the neck, putting pressure on that, cutting off blood, blocking that brain body blood connection, right? So he talked about how, hey, I know what that move is. I know that it's dangerous. We practice it at the gym. We know that it can make people pass out. We know that it stops the blood flow. We know that it can kill people. And I saw this officer doing that. And I told him about that. So Derek Chauvin had noticed that what he was doing was dangerous because I told him it was dangerous. I've experienced it. I've seen it. I'm familiar with it. And it's a bad thing to be doing generally, much less for, that 9 minutes and 26-second period.
Sure. So when the defense got up there, what were they doing? To me, it looked like they were needling him. They were trying to get him to explode or something like that. What was the defense trying to do? And then also, what was the end result for those of us who didn't actually see?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think the best way to put it is he stayed cool, calm, and collected the entire time. So the defense's standpoint, their theory, right, what they're trying to do is tell the jury a story that Derek Chauvin and these other officers were in this contentious situation, right? They were dealing with George Floyd, and they were surrounded by angry mobs of people in a dangerous area for high crime, and they were worried about moving and being harmed by these people, right? So they're trying to paint the picture of an angry mob. By trying to needle, Mr. Williams, they wanted to try to get him to show this angry persona, this angry personality that they're trying to argue existed on that day. And he didn't take the bait, right? He said, I'm not going to let you paint me that way. I was upset. I was angry. Yes, I called Derek Chauvin names. Yes, I swore at him. Yes, I called him X, Y, and Z. And the defense actually went through I think each curse word that he was used, and Mr. Williams' response was, yes, I did call him that because he was killing a man, right? I saw a man being killed and I was upset and I was trying to tell them and they wouldn't hear me. And I think he phrased it really well by saying, the defense was trying to say, well, you were angry. And Mr. Williams was essentially saying, I was raising my voice because they weren't hearing me. They weren't listening to me. I needed to be heard. And I think as a juror, I think any of them could connect with a situation where if a witness is seeing somebody assaulted and being killed, from a human perspective, it absolutely makes sense that that person is going to be upset or angry or animated and call somebody names, right? Because he was desperately trying to get Derek Chauvin to stop doing what he was doing, to stop hurting this human.
Yeah, and inadvertently he won the internet with his comments. Yeah, did you hear him? You did? Yes, I did say those things. And I think like you said about the humanness, at first I kind of chuckled about it, but the humanness is, yep, I did, because I was watching a man be murdered. So
Yeah.
So I would give a point to the prosecution there for that witness, and for not folding too, not being led into exploding or losing his cool.
Right. And I'll say this, anytime a witness is being cross-examined, right? Cross-examination is when the opposing party gets to ask questions, right? And typically on cross, if a witness is testifying and being questioned by the opposing party that they presumably don't like, they are going to be a little bit more combative. Their demeanor is going to change, their tone of voice is going to change. They might try to sort of butt heads with the questioner. That's a very common thing, and you see it in almost every cross-examination. So I thought he did have that small bit of combativeness, but I think it was the right amount, right? It was this polite disdain,
Yeah.
for lack of a better way to put it, for Eric Nelson, and just saying, yeah, I did say those things. Yes, I'm not going to let you put words in my mouth. But he also didn't go too far. I don't think he at all crossed that line of becoming unreasonable or unlikable. Like you said, he won the internet. I think he probably won the jury too, I would say.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny, he's trying to paint this crazy mob, but the photos from the other side of the street, there's like 8 people, and
Right, exactly.
they're standing calmly or as calmly as they can on the curb, not in the street. They weren't being rushed, they were on the curb. Another witness I want to bring up is a firefighter. And this firefighter, I forgot her name, but this firefighter was there on the scene on her day off. She's also then, as a firefighter, a first responder. Could you explain why the prosecution brought her and what message she was able to send?
Yeah, so sort of along the same lines of Mr. Williams, right? And I think the firefighter's name is Genevieve Hansen,
Mm-hmm.
I think is her name. So yeah, Miss Hansen was there on her day off, and what you see on the video and what she testified to was, hey, I'm a member of the Minneapolis Fire Department. I have at least a paramedic or EMT level background of training. I deal with people who are going through medical traumas. I can tell when something is sort of an emergency medical situation, right? So she got to come in, and not only, and I think the most powerful part was when you saw her, go up to the witness stand to swear to tell the truth. She's wearing her formal firefighter uniform, right?
Yeah.
Versus what you see in the video is it's her day off. On my day off, I'm probably wearing shorts and a raggedy t-shirt or a hoodie or something, so people wouldn't think, oh, for sure a lawyer. And same thing for her. So the officers, when they interacted with her, she was in whatever her day off attire was. So I think seeing her show up in her Class A formal uniform,
Yep.
was a very powerful notion of, hey, I actually am a firefighter. I am who I am saying I was, and here it is to prove it. Here's the city of Minneapolis uniform, right? I look professional. I am a professional, and I was a professional on that day, but you didn't believe.
So to me, she said 2 things in that video, or in her testimony today. She said, 1, I can tell when someone's in distress, but 2, I could have saved his life, or I could have had a chance to save his life. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. She was very much saying, here's what I saw. I saw a person in distress, and here's how I knew that, right? And she covered her training and her experience in doing that, her time at the academy, her certifications, her accreditations, all of those things she went over. So she's not just a random person off the street who doesn't know anything, right? She is a professional with at least some basic level of medical training.
In fact, it's her job to know if people are in medical distress.
Exactly. And what she testified to was saying, hey, you know what? Maybe only 10% of our calls are strictly fire. We get sent out 90% of the time with ambulatory services, right? So like the ambulance goes and we go. It's not always fires. So I think the judge stopped her just short, and this was one of those motions in limine, stopped her just short of saying, I for sure could have saved his life. But what she was able to say was, here's what I would have done had I been able to help, and here's why, right? And I think that was powerful to say, I've got this training, I've got this experience, I work for the city, for God's sakes. I'm like, the police department's cousin. That's police and fire, we work together often. So to see someone, within that same brethren, I think was very powerful.
Yeah. No, I agree with you about the uniform too. I thought that was I saw her walk in, or up to the witness stand. I'm like, perfect. She was, you're right. It wasn't just somebody on the street. It was somebody who is professional and trained. And I thought that was a really good touch. One last thing I want to talk about, and I don't want to talk about them as specific witnesses, but in general, why would the prosecution call children to the stand? I was listening. I felt a little uncomfortable. In fact, I almost saw it like it was going to benefit the defense. Like, why would you bring these little kids into this? But you have a different idea about that, or maybe there's even a legal reason why the prosecution brought children to the witness stand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say off the bat, I think you're completely right from the human standpoint, right? It's always touchy involving children in live testimony. It's scary, it's intimidating. It's not something you want necessarily to do unless you have to do it. And in this case, I think the state did it for two strategic reasons. Three. Number one, I think, was to further combat the defense's notion that there was this angry mob, this angry, dangerous mob, right? Because this mob is actually just Mr. Williams, who was getting a snack after going fishing. It's a Minneapolis firefighter, and it's some young children, right? It's minors who were out getting some snacks again.
Yeah.
So to establish, hey, here's who was actually there. It's not Fallujah, right? It's not a war zone. It's not officers being threatened. The other point, I think, and I agree with you, I think it could cut both ways, is the emotion of it, to sort of inject some human emotion. I think Mr. Blackwell in his opening statement said you're going to see this human bouquet, or this bouquet of humanity, right? People from all walks of life, ages, genders, races, everything. So I think it's adding to that. And then the other big point is that the state in this case is going to be seeking an aggravated sentence, right? What that is saying is that if Derek Chauvin is convicted, according to the Minnesota sentencing guidelines, there's a presumptive amount of prison time he'll get, right? Mm-hmm. And that number is contained within a little box. And again, if folks want to pull up the sentencing guidelines, they can see how that works. But there's this limited number, and unless there is a departure, he's only going to be sentenced within that box. And the way you get to a departure, that's saying we're going to impose a sentence that is more or less serious than the presumed sentence. You have to show, in this case, if they're going to ask for a more serious sentence, they're going to have to establish aggravating factors, meaning this crime was worse than the typical crime that is committed of this nature. And one way to get there is by establishing that the crime occurred and was committed in front of children.
Yeah.
Right. There's a case name for that. It's called Blakely. You'll hear it referred to as a Blakely factor.
Okay.
So by having the kids come in and testify, the state is, and all of those aggravating factors also have to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt that they occurred. So the state couldn't just get up there and say, yeah, the video shows there were kids. You have to bring the kids in and say, yes, I am a child, I'm real, and I was there at this date and this time. So by bringing in the kids, presumably they've established at least one Blakely factor. So if there's a conviction, that gives the judge a basis potentially to sentence Derek Chauvin to more prison time than he would be looking at ordinarily.
So the prosecution's playing chess on this one. They're playing three-dimensionally.
Exactly. Yep. And I will say, they have to give notice of these Blakely factors. So the defense knows it's coming, but it's the state absolutely is pinning their ears back and saying, hey, this is what we're going for. And it sucks to bring kids in, but we're going to do it because that's the way that we think we're going to get justice.
So how long will this kind of line of questioning occur? Eyewitnesses to kind of establish that it wasn't an angry mob, that it was all sorts of different kinds of people. Is the next, what is the next step? Is the next step experts, or, and when would we get there?
Yeah, good question. So the next two big buckets they're going to have to discuss are going to be Derek Chauvin's training. So the use of force, what is an appropriate, what is a standard use of force that police, that the MPD and that Derek Chauvin received. And then the other portion is going to be getting to that cause of death, right? And that's where the medical experts are going to come in to say, he died of X, Y, and Z. Here's what contributed to it. Presumably that, the state's experts will say it wasn't drugs or heart disease that killed him, or if it did, it was greatly and more so exacerbated by Derek Chauvin's actions. The defense is going to try to posit that no, it was the drugs and the heart disease and the clogged arteries and blah, 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 blah. So I don't know which one they're going to do first. I don't know if they're going to go towards cause of death with medical experts, or if they're going to get into the training first. But I think at some point they'll start moving along from the eyewitnesses, because you do have the video, and you've really had, the gas station attendant. I can't remember her name. I think she was the second witness. She was working at the gas station across the street. They had her come testify and get some video in with her. I don't think she offered a lot. Just because someone was there doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be super impactful. But I don't know which way. But up next, we'll see talk about proper use of force and training, and then the medical experts. Which one will be first? I don't know.
Sure. Last thing I want to bring up, interesting point to me, is I found out today that the video was 9.5 minutes and not 8, that he was kneeling on George Floyd for 9.5 minutes instead of 8:45. Now, maybe that's, the 45 seconds doesn't matter. But what's the difference? Why do we think for a year it was 8:45 and now it's 9.5?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know either. Maybe it's a matter of I just need to go back and rewatch it and think, hey, was my timer off? But I'm in the same boat. I didn't know that. But I will say the state is doing a great job in their opening statement. They had the video and the sort of a timeline up, right?
Yeah.
Showing, for all 9 minutes and 26 seconds, here's what's happening at the 1 minute mark. Here's what's happening at the 4 minute mark. And really splitting it in half and saying, okay, once we get to 4.5 minutes or around that time, he's no longer responsive.
Yeah.
And they made a big demarcation, and another 4 minutes, he's still on his neck, right? I thought that was really powerful. So whether it's 8:45 or 9:26, it's not good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nick, of course, thank you very much for your clarity and offering us insight in what's going on. Can't wait to meet with you again, and we'll see what happens.
Sounds good. Thanks, James.
All right, thank you.